Welcome to the General Petroleum Museum. My name is Jeff Pedersen. My wife and I own this collection of antique petroliana. Come on in. We're going to give you a tour through the collection, which will be a combination of a little history lesson and a visual inspection of all the pieces we have assembled here. So follow me. To get you localized here in the museum, we're going to give you a short pan through a portion of the facility. What you're seeing now are some of the gasoline pumps on the far wall, the beginnings of the marine collection. We're coming down now onto the antique truck, the 1927 Moreland, which we use as a buffet. And then down here, you're starting to see the beginnings of the 1920s General Petroleum Service Station. This fascia that's behind me is an exact replica of a 1920s General Petroleum Service Station. The two gasoline pumps on either side of me are Roman column gasoline pumps. Now from here we're going to go over to the gasoline pumps on the wall, and we're going to see the evolvement of the gasoline pump from its crudest form up until a pump from the 1950s. Well, here we are at the beginning of the gasoline pump, but let's go back one step further than that and talk about the beginnings of the oil business. In 1859, when Colonel Drake dug that first oil well, they went down 65 feet, found oil, and they started taking oil out of the ground at the rate of about 25 barrels per day. In those days, the refinery process was very simple. The crude oil was put into something as unimaginative as a teapot. The temperature was turned up, and the oil broke down into three composite parts. Heavy ends were used for lubricating oils. The middle range was a product called kerosene, which was used to light lamps with. And the final fraction, the lightest end, was a product called naphtha. It had little or no use and unfortunately represented oftentimes the biggest share of the refined crude. For the most part, naphtha was thrown on the ground and wasted at the refinery site. In the early 1890s, the internal combustion engine is invented, and it uses a product called gasoline. Gasoline and naphtha are one and the same. So now the light comes on and we start to see what happens. The earliest gasoline service stations didn't exist. You went to the livery stable, you went to the grocery store, or possibly to what was referred as a bulk station, and you bought a wooden crate like this, and it had two 5-gallon cans full of gasoline in it. It weighed approximately 95 pounds, and that was real self-service. You carried that to your automobile, put it in your car, and if you were still able, got on your way. Obviously, that wasn't very efficient for the seller, and it wasn't very easy for the buyer, so there had to be a better way. And what you see behind me is the beginnings of the better way. Samuel Bowser took a pump that pumped kerosene, and he modified it so that it would safely pump gasoline. And all of these gasoline pumps behind me from here back are that type of gasoline pump. We refer to them as blind gasoline pumps, and that's because we can't see the gasoline in the pumping mechanism itself. And another interesting aspect of it is that measurement was pretty much blind also. As I'm turning this handle, it's forcing this straight gear rod to go up and down, which pulls a plunger inside the cylinder, which creates a vacuum and pumps the gasoline out of the ground. Now the measuring device does not measure a flow of liquid, it is measuring this straight gear's teeth as they go up and down. So you can see that a flow of a liquid not necessarily was what it was measuring, and that's why these were called blind gasoline pumps. Both the seller and the buyer took it on blind faith that the good things were happening. Here's the measuring device. But remember, it is only measuring the up and down travel of this straight gear rod. The blind gasoline pumps may be very unsophisticated, but they got the gasoline out of the ground and they got it into your container. You didn't pump the gasoline directly into your automobile. It was taken out of a faucet like this into a container and put into your car. The next thing that happens to the gasoline pump is not so much of a change in the concept of the gasoline pump, but the form that went around it. This is what we refer to as the Roosevelt gasoline pump. President Roosevelt didn't invent this gasoline pump. What he did was break up the Standard Oil Trust. And the breaking up of the Standard Oil Trust This pump is the natural outgrowth of that. In 1912, when the Standard Oil Trust was broken, they controlled 80% of the entire petroleum industry in the United States and probably more so in the rest of the world. It was a huge monopoly controlled almost single-handedly by John D. Rockefeller. Over the years, he had very insidiously inserted his corporation called the Standard Oil Trust into the petroleum business, and they controlled every facet of it. At one time in this country, the Rockefeller Combine owned every rail car used in the United States to haul petroleum. So what does this gasoline pump Roosevelt and Rockefeller have in common? Prior to the breakup of the Standard Oil Trust, because they controlled virtually the whole business, having what we call a monopoly, Rockefeller did not need to advertise his products, and consequently he didn't. With the breakup of the trust, the remaining Standard Oil companies and the independent companies that were beginning to emerge had to learn how to advertise their products in order to survive. Advertising was all important because if you understand the refinery process, you would instantly know what the oil companies knew, and that was this. All gasolines at that time were exactly alike. And so advertising wasn't just a big part of it, it was the whole thing. So this gasoline pump now has two purposes. It's the same old blind gasoline pump, pumping the gasoline out of the ground into your container. Here we have a skirt, an advertising bell, and an advertising globe. And these things are what are used to create the image in your mind that the oil company wants to create to make you buy their gasoline. The advertising globes become used at this time, and it's the first time that we see electricity added to the gasoline pump. The first of the advertising globes were like this. It's one piece of glass, very heavy piece of glass. It's called milk glass, and it's blown in a mold. The artwork would then be painted on the outside. The next version of the gasoline advertising globe is one like this American. It has a metal frame and two separate glass lenses. Here the artwork is silk screened on the inside and heat treated so that it would be able to withstand inclement weather. The next evolutions of the advertising globe use, instead of a metal frame, they use glass frames and ultimately plastic frames to hold the glass lenses, but everything else remains the same. Gasoline globes were routinely used up until about 1959. In 1912, we see the beginnings of the visible gasoline pump. The visible gasoline pump doesn't have an inventor or a patent. It's a combination of several people's ideas, so nobody's quite certain just exactly when they began to emerge. But one thing we are sure of, and that's the purpose of the visible gasoline pump. The visible gasoline pump was the vestigial beginnings of consumerism in the gasoline business. To operate a visible gasoline pump, we pump this handle back and forth, which pumped the gasoline out of the ground, and it was stored in the glass cylinder up here. Now this is not a glass tank, it's a glass cylinder. The purpose of the glass cylinder is twofold. First, by looking through the glass, the customer could see the quality of the gasoline. If the gasoline was a clear, straw color with an absence of sediment, he knew he was buying a good grade of gasoline. Secondly, and equally important at this period of time, now becomes a better measurement system. As the gasoline flows out of this vessel into the automobile, and this is the first gasoline pump where they generally deliver the gasoline directly to the automobile, as it flows out of this cylinder, it will mark off these spots, and that will indicate to you how many gallons. Now, this clear vision type of a visible gasoline pump has the numbers and the markers etched right in the glass. This Tokheim behind me, which is a altogether different style of measuring, has metal markers on the outside of the glass. It works exactly the same fashion. And there was a third permutation of this where the metal markers were inserted in the cylinder and immersed in the gas. But they all measured in the same fashion. As the gasoline flows out of the cylinder into your car, when you stopped it, you could tell fairly precisely how much gasoline you had purchased. These typically are what people referred to as antique gasoline pumps. And for years, these are what most people restored when they wanted to restore a gasoline pump, or when they thought of an old gasoline pump, this is what most people thought about. Today, a pump like this has a pretty high value, somewhere around $3,000 or $4,000. Off to my left, we have a twin visible clear vision gasoline pump, which is a remarkable looking pump. And it's, again, quite an innovation because it allowed the person to pump two separate grades of gasoline simultaneously. So it's the first dual pump, and it appears in a visible mode. One more permutation of the blind and the visible gasoline pump. And that is, as the blind pumps became obsolete, devices were made that attached a visible fixture to the top of the old blind gasoline pumps so that they became, in some form or another, very similar to the visible gasoline pumps. And we'll see a copy of that shortly. These visible gasoline pumps, as I said before, were made from the early teens clear up into the early 1950s or the late 1940s. And they were used all over the United States because they didn't require electricity to pump the gasoline out of the ground. That was still all done manually. And these things lasted forever. In 1922, we see the next and probably the most dramatic change in the gasoline pump. And what happens here is, for the first time, electricity is used to pump the gasoline out of the ground rather than to light the light fixture as strictly an advertising device. So what we have here is what's referred to as a clock face mechanism gasoline pump. Clock face because of the way it displays the gallons. This is a measuring device for the first time with considerable accuracy. We have an electric motor right here which turns a centrifugal pump. It pumps the stream of gasoline through an air eliminator, so when the gasoline arrives at the calibrating device, it is a solid stream of gasoline, not a combination of air and gasoline, but a solid stream of gasoline ready to be metered or measured. The metering device is fairly simple. If you imagine a pot with a vein in it, such as this, the flow of the gasoline hits the vein and turns the shaft, and that's all it amounts to. It comes out the top up here. The shaft is spinning. We change the rotation of the shaft from a vertical to a 90-degree, and that gives us a display on the clock face mechanism, which now measures the gasoline. Each time you hear that little bell ring, it indicated 1 gallon of gasoline had flowed into your car. Where was the consumer? Well, he was still here. The glass sight gauge continues to allow the customer to see the quality of the gasoline, to make sure there is no sediment and no air in the mix that's being measured. So this is the first modern gasoline pump. They appear in 1922, and they are replaced with the computer mechanism in 1932. This Tokheim 850 is exactly the same gasoline pump, but it has the skirt on it and all the paraphernalia, the advertising portion of the gasoline pump. We also have in this collection a Reen-Bennett Siamese twin clock face done in the shell colors, a very, very unique, very rare gasoline pump. In 1932, the gasoline business would be changed forever, at least the marketing concepts. And that was because of the advent of the computer gasoline pump, or the computerized gasoline pump. This pump has a mechanical computer in it, and for the first time, something more than just a simple indication of gallons sold is actually taking place. The device was invented at the Wayne Pump Company in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in 1932 by 3 men who worked on the production lines at Wayne. They were not research and development type folks. They were just ordinary people like you and me who saw a need, had a better idea, and resolved it with the invention of the mechanical computer. If you compare the mechanical computer gasoline pump to the clock face mechanism pump, they are almost identical in every way. If we were to take this front panel off, it uses the same parts: an electric motor, an electric pump, an air eliminating device, and a calibrating unit, all placed in exactly the same position. The only difference between the two, remember the shaft as it comes out, it turned one time 45 degree, and that gave us our information in a flat plane. What they simply did was they added one more vertical shaft, one more 90, one more vertical, one more 90, until they had now what computer people would refer to as 3 bits of information. And those 3 bits are right here, here, and here. Here we have the price in cents per gallon. Here we have the total dollars and cents of the sale. And here we have an indicator which shows the total number of gallons. This changed gasoline marketing forever. Obviously, this is where you'd want to buy your gasoline if you had a choice between this type of a gas pump and any of the ones we've seen beforehand. The next thing that happened with the computer in the gasoline pump is that some people did not want to buy or use the license privilege of the Wayne Company, and so they tried to get around it in somewhat illegal fashions. And we have a classic example of that. The Hayes Company, which was an old line pump manufacturer, had been around and been successful for years, was unwilling to compromise themselves and begin to buy the computer. So what they did was they mixed the clock face mechanism, or the single plane measuring device, and up here in the corner, I'm not sure if you can see that, but right here in this corner is a computer which totalizes the sale. This was found to be an intrusion or a infection of the patent rights of the Wayne Company, and Hayes was put out of business because they had illegally copied the patent device. This is a Model 50 Wayne gasoline pump. It's referred to as a showcase, and you can see how it got its name. These pumps appear in 1936. They were used in this style, the 50. Then they were used also in a derivation called the 60 and another one called the 70. As the pump became more modern, it got slimmer and the showcase was of less value, but it functioned a lot better. The 50 is the classic of all the showcase gasoline pumps, but probably the least functional of the 3. The pump was manufactured in such a way that in this display case could be shown things like tires, batteries, any kind of aftermarket devices that the oil companies wanted to sell you out on the island. And that was the beauty of this. It brought the showroom out to the island where you bought your gasoline. These pumps have become very rare. A lot to do with that is that there weren't a lot of them sold. They were brought into usage in 1936, which is part of the Depression. They were an expensive pump. They were subject to a lot of problems, and so those that sold, I think, went out of business in a hurry. And so we don't have very many of these left around. So they have become very rare and consequently very expensive. A well-restored Wayne 50 with a real globe on it, a good paint job, is worth about $9,000. This is the newest gasoline pump in this display, and it's a gasoline pump that was manufactured in the late 1940s, early 1950s. How we tell the chronological age of these gasoline pumps is, generally speaking, by the height of them. Pumps such as this one, which are 6 feet or more, were generally manufactured before or during World War II. Pumps 5 feet tall or such were manufactured after the war and represent divergent ideas about the architecture of what service stations should look like. The Martin and Swartz style gasoline pump is, in my opinion, probably one of the handsomest of all the pumps to evolve in the 1950s. It came in a couple of styles. This style, which is referred to as a glass add panel pump, and you can see here a lighted flat glass that tells the brand of the gasoline. That was one style. The other style is what we refer to as a script top. Sometimes you would see these without a globe or with a globe. It was the option of the customer. The script tops never carried a globe because they used, instead of this glass panel, it was filled in metal and it had a lighted, embossed plastic visible portion which lit up and told you the brand and the name of the gasoline. The script top gasoline pumps were manufactured only for 3 companies: Mobil Oil Company, Conoco, and Sunoco. What you're looking at now in the showcase gasoline pump are the first two of a set of 4 matched brass oil spout with the pectin embossed in the brass. These are Canadian oil buckets and very unusual. Below that are a series of toys, metal railroad cars, some wooden tankers, things like that. These pieces are from anywhere from the late 1920s right on up into the 50s. There's a refinery badge there, a set of cufflinks. This is a little interesting piece, the Golden Shell thermometer. It's a little badge that was worn on the service station operator's shirt, and it includes a thermometer, really a cute little piece. Down on the next row, we have some more of the Shell tank cars, metal and plastic both. And now we're seeing a Shell outboard can from the 1950s. A little Shell advertising display for Shell burner oil. A couple of different styles of hats. The gray one is from the 1950s, and the green one on the left is the old whipcord worn before and after World War II. Just in the back there you can see the top or the upper portion of a fender cover with the Shell lubrication emblem embossed in the leatherette surface. And now down to the very bottom of the case, we have an assemblage here of embossed glass product bottles, a Shell paperweight, again some more of the toys with the Shell logo on it, a 1-pound can of grease, and coming into view now is a Shell device that was used as a stand for sample bottles. It's cast metal with holes in it to hold the bottles in place, and right in front of that is a 1-gallon can. And what's unique about this particular style of can is that the Shell pectin is embossed in the metal on the can. This is a rare can, hard to find.